So in the last lecture, in the last part of the today's lecture, we saw what distributed ledger systems were, how DLT's distributed ledger technology was used to build blockchain systems, right? And we discussed briefly that achieving consensus is a key criteria in decentralized systems, and that applies for blockchain systems as well. So let us try and understand why we need consensus in decentralized systems. And to understand this, let us take the example of a network. Now, in a network, you have multiple actors, multiple nodes, which are separated by a distance. And let's take another assumption into this network, saying that the nodes that are part of this network, the actors within this network, do not trust each other. So the question remains, how can this network still function when actors are separated from each other and when they do not trust each other? In other words, how can they achieve some kind of an agreement so that the network can move forward with a set of actions? So to understand how this can be achieved, let us take the example of the Byzantine Empire, which was based in Eastern Europe. So I'm presuming some of you have heard what the Byzantine Empire was, but for those who are unaware, this was an empire used to exist as part of the broader Roman Empire during the medieval ages and also during the ancient times. So let's say there are several generals who form part of the Byzantine army, and each general has their own individual set of soldiers. In other words, they have their own individual armies. And let's say these generals want to occupy a castle. So they surround the castle and they need to coordinate an action in order to attack or capture it. Now, the problem within this setting is the generals need to coordinate their actions, meaning they need to achieve some kind of a collective agreement to either attack or retreat the castle at the same time. So if, let's say, some generals decide to attack and some of them decide to retreat, the problem is their campaign could end in failure. So given that generals are far from each other, they are forced to rely on messengers. Okay, so the problem with this setting is, forget about reaching consensus for the time being. The problem is because if these generals rely on messengers to communicate with each other, there are at least two major issues. Now, one thing is the messengers may themselves be dishonest. Okay, so imagine a general saying attack as the message to and the messenger takes that to another general. Midway, this messenger who is a traitor could change that message and instead say give the message as retreat to the receiving general. What happens as a result? There's no consensus achieved, and the general that receives the message will retreat instead of attacking. The other problem is because messengers themselves have to travel, they might either get captured or killed midway, and that would result in their message not reaching the other general. Okay, that results in one kind of a coordination problem within this network. First of all, a general that sends a message to another general has no way to ensure whether that message was received or not. The other problem is, let's say the second general that receives a message chooses to send back a confirmation to the first general via the same messenger. Now, this second general also has no way to ensure that that confirmation reached the first general. So the problem is, because it's not possible for these generals to verify the messages that are sent back and forth between them, the generals will generally doubt each other. So the first problem with this network is there is no trust within the system. Okay, so the question is, how can these generals, despite having no sense of trust amongst themselves, reach some sort of a common agreement to either attack or retreat from the castle? Now, another added problem, another kind of a collective agreement problem, is that one of the generals could be a traitor. Okay, now in the presence of traitors within the network, the question is, how can the other honest generals still reach an agreement and either attack successfully or avoid an embarrassment and retrieve collectively? So let's say in this setting, let's say General 1 says retreat to one general. Okay, And so here general 1 says retreat to general 2, but says attack to general 3. So in other words, the general 1 is giving different messages to the other two generals that make up the network. Now, because generals 2 and 3 can also communicate with each other, it's possible for them to verify the kind of messages they received from general 1. So in other words, because of the free flow of information within this network, it is possible for generals 2 and 3 to identify who the traitor is, which is general 1. And secondly, because 2 out of 3 generals agree to attack, they can reach consensus, right? So what is happening here is, despite the presence of a traitor, the other generals in the system who are honest, they are able to identify the traitor. And secondly, because the majority of the network is able to reach consensus. In this case, the generals 2 and 3 who are honest are able to reach a consensus because they are the majority within the network. And so a successful action, which in this case is attack, goes forward. All right. Now, the question is, how do we apply this more generally to any network? Like, we saw this in a simple case where the network is able to reach consensus, but in a more general setting, the question is, to what extent can the network tolerate traitors? Like, the remaining question is, what is the minimum number of dishonest actors within the network that the network can tolerate and still achieve consensus towards a particular action? So to understand this, let us say that each general is a node within that network, okay? And let's say the network consists in total of n nodes, where each of these n nodes are honest, whereas the rest d nodes are dishonest, meaning they are traitors. So obviously, the total number of nodes n is given as a sum of h plus d. And let's say that the honest nodes can either attack or retreat. So half of them are expected to attack, and half of the honest nodes are expected to retreat. And let's assume that the dishonest nodes will simply agree with honest nodes. We do not know which direction they'll take. So given this setting, the expected number of nodes in favor of an attack is expected to be h by 2 plus d. All right. Why do we come up with this expression? Because h by 2 is the expected number of honest nodes that are likely to favor an attack. And d, as we said, will simply agree with the honest nodes. So the total number of expected nodes that favor an attack is given by this expression. And similarly, the number of nodes that favor retreat will also be the same expression. Right? Now, because the expected number of nodes favoring attack and the expected number of nodes favoring retreat is the same, the system cannot move forward. The network cannot take either decision. So the question is, what is a minimum threshold of nodes that are required to make the network go forward, meaning reach some kind of a decision, whether to attack or retreat? So to understand this, let's say the minimum number of nodes required to make either decision t is t, which is given by this expression. What are we saying here? We are simply saying that when the number of nodes is greater than h by 2 plus d, then the system will be able to take some kind of a decision. If t greater than h by 2 plus d, where the nodes given by this expression favor attack, then we can expect that the network will agree to collectively attack the castle. And obviously, if t greater than h by 2 plus d, where h by 2 plus d nodes favor retreat, then the collective action taken will be to retreat. What is the other extra condition? The additional boundary condition is the expected number of nodes required to make a decision is always at most the number of honest nodes within the network. Why is that another requirement? Because if t exceeds h, then the number of dishonest nodes that become part of that collective agreement increases substantially. So what happens as t becomes becomes larger and larger compared to h, more and more dishonest nodes will start to gain control over the network, and therefore that's detrimental towards the progress of the network itself, right? So, and we do not want that. The honest nodes would never want the dishonest nodes to gain any kind of credible control over the network. So when we combine these two equations, 1 and 2, we get this inequality. And if you simplify further by removing t, we get this resulting expression. And if you solve this further, we get this inequality which says the number of dishonest nodes is as long as the number of dishonest nodes is less than half the number of honest nodes, the system can tolerate traitors. The system will reach some kind of an agreement, whether that's a track or a treat, we don't care. Now, because we know that the number of nodes is the sum of h plus d, we can rewrite equation 3 as d less than n minus d by 2. So we are simply rewriting this h and replacing this with n minus d. In other words, when we rewrite this, we get 3d by 2 less than n by 2, or in other words, d is less than n by 3. Okay, so what is this expression telling us? As long as the number of dishonest nodes is less than a third of all the nodes in the network, the system can tolerate these dishonest nodes and achieve some kind of an agreement. In other words, as long as the number of dishonest nodes is less than 1/3, the system can move forward and take a collective decision. And this is in fact the basis for distributed ledger technology and the blockchain based cryptocurrencies. Okay, if you're further interested in understanding these issues, I mean, there are a ton of computer science papers, articles, journal articles that are written that explore more complex networks, meaning that explore different types of scenarios where generals communicate different messages to each other. So this is obviously a very simple model. In fact, the first model that explored the Byzantine generals problem, but more complicated models exist. So if you're really interested in understanding this further, there are tons of articles, and I welcome you to have a look at them. But for the purposes of understanding how consensus is achieved within blockchain-based systems, this is more or less sufficient. So you can already see here that even in the presence of dishonest nodes up to a certain limit, the system can take some kind of a decision, and that's the key point being made here. Now, obviously, we saw that in most decentralized systems, including blockchain, transactions are stored across a number of nodes, right? Now, for this system to achieve consensus, all the nodes need to collectively agree on the contents. At least a majority of the nodes need to agree in order to achieve consensus. Now, we have seen to what extent achieving this consensus is possible. But the question is, why do we need to achieve consensus? The requirement to achieve consensus follows from the fact that nodes, without these kind of safeguards, the network can be subject to double spending and fraud. So what do we mean by double spending? So imagine you go to Starbucks to purchase a cup of coffee. Now, if you pay Starbucks with physical cash, with hard cash, the thing is the transaction is instant. Like you are paying $2, you're handing out $2 bill to the barista, and once you hand over the bill, you no longer hold that cash with you. So physically, the unit of cash is only spent once for purchasing that coffee. But when it comes to digital systems, digital currencies like Bitcoin, the problem is without proper safeguards, it is possible to make changes to the digital signature of that cryptocurrency and try and spend it more than once. So I could end up spending the same unit of Bitcoin for purchasing one item, and if this underlying blockchain system is not safe enough, it doesn't have adequate safeguards, I can use the same unit of currency of Bitcoin and try and spend it for purchasing item 2. So double spending is one major problem associated with digital currencies, and the other thing is obviously fraud. Now, if the blockchain system is not safe enough, doesn't have enough safeguards, it is also possible for users to manipulate the ledger. So imagine there's a blockchain system that allows somebody to transfer $100 to me via a transaction on that blockchain. Now, if the blockchain system doesn't have proper safeguards, I could easily go back and change the contents and change the details of that transaction from $100 to $1 billion. So what is happening? Because the system was unable to check properly or detect that I had made changes to the ledger itself. Now, the same transaction through which I received $100 is showing that I received $1 billion. So I've manipulated the system, manipulated the ledger, and I've become a billionaire on the blockchain system. So these are two key problems that blockchain systems have to resolve in order for them to function properly. Luckily, the way they achieve this is, first of all nodes must agree on the order of transactions, and only then will a transaction be added to the system. So what this means is, even if a subset of nodes act as traitors, meaning even if a subset of nodes are traitors themselves, or if they are compromised, the system, a good blockchain system, will still be able to synchronize itself, remain in sync with the correct transactions in the correct order, as long as the rest of the honest nodes are able to agree on the set of transactions. So that's one way in which consensus is achieved. Now, the second thing is, blockchain systems have such advanced algorithms in place, which are beyond the scope of this course, obviously, such that no single node can influence the system. Okay, so no single node can try and change the ledger on its own, because obviously when this changed ledger with one node is compared against the ledgers, the same copy of the ledger across all the other systems, across all the other nodes will be able to detect that this node is lying. Okay, and they'll be able to take corrective action to maintain the synchronicity within the network. Okay, if you're really interested in how consensus is achieved at the level of the code, please go to any popular website dealing in cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and you'll find the exact mechanism, the exact algorithms that help achieve this consensus. But for this purpose, for the purposes of our lecture, it's sufficient to understand that no single node can gain influence over the ledger, meaning over the system itself, because the transactions that are written into the system, into the ledger, are very difficult to change. They're not impossible, but they are very, very, very difficult to manipulate. Secondly, nodes cannot gain majority control over the network. We'll see how that happens very shortly. But for now, just remember that a subset of nodes, or any single node, cannot gain majority control over the network. And that's the other way in which the system, through consensus, ensures that there is no double spending and there is no fraud committed on a blockchain-based system. Now, how does a consensus mechanism work in general? Generally speaking, a consensus is achieved in decentralized systems through 4 steps. So whenever a node receives a set of transactions or creates transactions itself, these transactions are relayed to the rest of the network. Okay, so these transactions get broadcasted to every other node in the network, and then thereafter, the transaction or the set of transactions is validated by each node. And then each node, after conducting the validation, will exchange the results of this validation with all the other nodes in the network. So by doing that, by sharing this information, all the nodes are trying to achieve consensus, agreement amongst each other. And once the whole network agrees on the set of validated transactions, the new validated set of transactions are bundled together into a block, and then they are added at the end of this blockchain. So this new blockchain, which was earlier comprising 3 blocks and now comprises 4 blocks, becomes the new blockchain, becomes the updated ledger, which is then updated across all the nodes within the system. So once this blockchain is extended by an additional block, the new blockchain is updated across all the nodes, and the system then waits for a new set of transactions to arrive. So this is the typical cycle through which the system achieves consensus to be able to manage the blockchain, to add new transactions to the blockchain, and to verify them, and to maintain sync among all the participants within the network. Now, in practice, there are at least 2 different classes of algorithms within cryptocurrency systems, so let's say within blockchain systems, that achieve consensus. So the first set of algorithms are called proof of work, and the other set of algorithms are called proof of stake. Now, the main difference between these algorithms is the way in which they get to create a new block and also the way in which they are rewarded. Okay. Now, obviously, nodes in a network are out there because they intend to get compensated in some way. Especially in cryptocurrency systems and in blockchain systems, nodes have to be compensated in some form for the work they do, for the work of verification that they do. So between proof of work and proof of stake, there are differences in how they get to create the new block and also how they get rewarded. Now, there are many more advanced algorithms out there, and many more are being developed as we speak. So if you're really interested, I recommend that you go to this website here and check it out to understand more advanced consensus algorithms out there. Now, how does proof of work actually work? So proof of work is pretty simple. Now, as I said, generally speaking, in a blockchain system that is based on proof of work, new transactions get submitted to the network, meaning one or more nodes receive the transactions and then relay it to the rest of the network. And once these transactions arrive, the nodes that are part of this network compete against each other to verify those transactions. Okay, so in a proof of work system, all the nodes are essentially competing against each other. How do they compete? Well, the system presents a very difficult mathematical puzzle that each node must try and solve. And a node's likelihood of solving this puzzle depends on the work done by it, meaning a node's likelihood of solving this puzzle is contingent on the amount of computational power it has. Okay, but remember, if you have 10 nodes in a network and one node simply adds more and more computational power, then it is possible that that node will get majority control over the network, gain unnecessary control over the network. So how do you prevent this? Well, blockchain systems that are based on proof of work have a counter mechanism. What they do is the difficulty of this math puzzle is dependent on the number of nodes in the network and also the aggregate work done by all the nodes. That is, the aggregate amount of computational power available with all these nodes. So what is happening is, if more nodes become part of the network, if more nodes join the network, then the difficulty of the math puzzle goes up accordingly. If more nodes add more computational resources to try and solve the puzzle, to try and gain an upper hand, then the difficulty increases alongside. So what is happening here? The blockchain system, the network itself, by increasing the difficulty depending on these two factors, is ensuring that no single node or no subset of nodes is able to gain excess control over the network. Okay. Now, there is no specific logic behind solving this math puzzle, and instead every node has to employ a brute force technique. So they have to do guesswork and try and solve this math puzzle, and whichever node succeeds in solving this puzzle gets to create the new block. So the first node that solves this puzzle will immediately seek permission via consensus, so it will broadcast that it has created this new block to the rest of the network, and through consensus it gets permission from the rest of the network to create a new block. So once that happens, this successful node will bundle all these new transactions that are validated, add them to the block, and then it will attach this new block to the end of the blockchain, and this updated blockchain is then broadcast to the rest of the network so that all the other nodes can update their individual blockchain copies. Okay, what happens to the successful node afterwards? In return for solving this puzzle, this successful node is rewarded with new coins. Coins here depend on whatever cryptocurrency underlies this blockchain system. And secondly, the successful node also gets awarded some transaction fee. So remember, just like you pay coffee using your credit card, and therefore you'll pay not only for coffee but also pay a small commission to your credit card provider like Visa or MasterCard, transactions conducted on the blockchain also have to pay a certain transaction fee. So any node that is successful in creating a new block under a proof of work system gets compensated first with new coins that are minted by that blockchain system, and secondly, it also gets compensated with transaction fee. In the case of Bitcoin, this proof of work process is called mining. Why do you call it mining? Because all these nodes are actively trying to solve this math puzzle to mint new coins, to create new coins. So all these nodes are actually called miners under the Bitcoin terminology. And the process, the proof of work process that they indulge in is called mining. Now, there are a number of different cryptocurrencies that are out there that rely on a proof of work consensus mechanism. Most notably, obviously, Bitcoin. You also have Ethereum, Zcash, and Monero. And there are many more such cryptocurrencies out there that use proof of work. In comparison to proof of work, proof of stake operates under a very different setting. So under proof of stake, every node, as the name suggests, obviously, every node has a certain stake. How is a stake decided? Well, the stake of a node is a function of its wealth, meaning how many coins it has, and also how long that node held those coins. So the age of that node. So the stake is a function of the node wealth and the age of that wealth. And obviously, nodes with a higher stake are generally more trusted by the system, and therefore they stand a better chance of creating the next block. So consider two nodes, one having 30 coins and the other having 10 coins. Then under a proof of stake setting, the node with 30 coins is 3 times more likely to create the next block compared to a node with 10 coins. Okay. Now, nodes do not necessarily have to own all the coins themselves. You can, as a node, you can also lease coins. You can rent coins from other nodes and improve your aggregate wealth, and therefore gain an upper hand, gain better chances of creating the next block. Now, unlike a proof of work system, nodes in proof of stake are rewarded only with transaction fees. So there's no mining involved under a proof of stake system. So no new coins are created. All the coins in a proof of stake system are created beforehand, and no new mining takes place. There are also a lot of popular cryptocurrencies that use a proof of stake mechanism, namely Dash, Stellar, Neo, and Tezos. But again, there are many such many such cryptocurrencies out there. When you compare proof of work versus proof of stake based blockchain systems, there are significant differences. So obviously, under a proof of work system, the process of creating a new block is not deterministic. Why is that? We saw that every node is required to solve this difficult math puzzle, and it doesn't matter that a node adds more computational resources to try and gain an upper hand. The difficulty of the algorithm changes instantly to reflect the greater computational power of the network as a whole. So what this means is the chances of solving this puzzle are essentially determined by brute force, and so the creation of a new block is more or less stochastic in nature. It's non-deterministic. On the other hand, in the case of a proof of stake system, it's very clear that the node with the highest stake will get to create the next block. So the process of block creation under a proof of stake system is far more or less deterministic. How do proof of work nodes get rewarded? With new coins and transaction fee, like we just discussed, whereas in proof of stake, they only get rewarded with transaction fees alone. Now, the systems, the nodes that are active in proof of work systems, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, are really large server farms. So unless they employ thousands of servers to provide the computational resource required, and also due to competition between the nodes themselves, the amount of energy and the amount of investments you need to make in order to become a successful miner is very huge, is large. Many server farms run into millions and millions of dollars of investment. So in fact, and obviously when you run thousands of servers to mine under a proof of work system, the amount of energy you need to consume in order to run those servers is huge. And in fact, in the case of Bitcoin, it has been estimated that in 2018, the amount of power, the amount of energy consumed by all the Bitcoin nodes to create those next blocks was equivalent to the amount of energy consumed by the country of Colombia, which is in South America. So you can see that being a node in a proof of work system can be quite resource and capital intensive. On the other hand, operating a proof of stake system is much cheaper. Okay. Similarly, because of some of the mechanisms, safety protocols employed in proof of work systems, they're quite hard to break. It's very difficult to indulge in double spend or commit fraud under a proof of work system. But here, it's more or less unclear. In proof of stake, it's less clear as to what the level of security provided or available is. Now, one of the key problems affecting proof of work systems is obviously not all nodes are able to provide the same level of computing power. Some nodes have a lot of computing power at their disposal, whereas some don't. So what we see in terms of historical trend is that many nodes that are able to provide that only have less computing power are not able to make enough profits. Obviously, running a server farm and accessing so much electricity has certain costs. So nodes that have less computing power are unable to compete with the bigger nodes that have more computing power, and therefore they exit the market. So what we are seeing in recent times is there is an increasing centralization of blockchain systems such as those of Bitcoin and Ethereum, where the node system, the network of nodes, is being increasingly controlled by fewer and fewer players. And most of these players are large dominant players which have extensive computing power at their disposal. So what we're seeing is in many proof of work systems, there is increasing centralization of the network, which obviously defeats the very purpose for which distributed ledger technology and blockchain systems were created. On the other hand, the degree of control exerted in a proof of stake system is again determined by the stake of a node. So if you see here these two graphs, you can clearly see that as nodes make more and more investment, in the case of a proof of work system, the rewards increase in an exponential form. So after a certain threshold, the rewards reaped by nodes that make more investment, meaning the rewards enjoyed by nodes that have that have large computing power are simply way too high compared to nodes that make less investment. On the other hand, in the case of a proof of stake system, the rewards are directly proportional to the amount of investment made by nodes. So here, the rewards are more or less straightforward, whereas here, in the case of a proof of work system, you're dealing with a very asymmetric market. All right? So these are some of the major issues affecting blockchain systems depending on the kind of consensus mechanism they employ. So I hope you have a much better overview of consensus mechanisms. You have gained some basic insight into why consensus mechanisms are really important. Again, I want to make it very clear that these are very introductory in nature, right? So if you're really interested in understanding how these work, what kind of different consensus mechanisms exist out there, and if you have the required computing skills, I really encourage you to go and explore some of those some of the articles out there and try and understand these consensus mechanisms more deeply. And this is in fact essential if you're intending to start a business within the crypto space. All right. So in the next lecture, or in the next part, we'll focus on cryptocurrencies, and we'll start with discussing Bitcoin and focus extensively on that. All right. Thank you so much.